It's D-Day for Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, and all eyes are on the White House. Polling stations have opened across more than 25 states in the U.S. Millions of Americans are casting their ballot to elect their next president. With polling underway, Harris and Trump each need at least 270 electoral votes to win. The Battleground States of Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin are expected to be pivotal to the path to victory. Any of these 7 states can potentially swing to either the Democrats or Republicans. They hold the keys to the presidency. Arizona has 11 electoral votes, and its polls close at 9 p.m. Trump won Arizona in 2016, but then lost it narrowly to President Biden in 2020. Georgia has 16 electoral votes. Trump won the state in 2016, but in 2020, Biden beat him by fewer than 12,000 votes. The first time a Democratic candidate had won the state since Bill Clinton in 1992. Allegations that Trump and more than a dozen allies engaged in a criminal conspiracy to overturn Georgia's 2020 results are now at the center of an election interference case. But Trump has denied any wrongdoing. Michigan's 15 electoral votes went to Trump in 2016 after almost 3 decades of supporting Democrats for president. The state flipped in 2020 with Biden taking the state. Michigan is part of the so-called blue wall of Midwestern states, considered crucial for Democrats. Shifting focus to Nevada, it has voted Democratic for the past 4 presidential elections with 6 electoral votes. Nevada has the smallest total of the 7 presidential battleground states. North Carolina is still dealing with the devastating aftermath of Hurricane Helene. Both candidates have visited since the storm. Democrats have won the state's 16 electoral votes only twice since 1968, most recently in 2008 when voters backed Barack Obama. Trump edged out Biden in the state in 2020 by a little more than 1 point. Pennsylvania, with its 19 electoral votes, is a critical battleground for Harris and Trump. Biden took the state in 2020, while Trump won there in 2016. Harris and Trump have visited the state at least 20 times each in the months leading up to the election. And Wisconsin, voters have backed Democrats for decades until 2016, when Trump flipped the state and secured its 10 electoral votes. Voters swung back in 2020 when Biden won the state. The state was decided by less than 1% in the last 2 elections.
Thanks for voting.
Oh, yes. Our correspondent Sidhan Sibol is now joining us live from Capitol Hill. Sidhan, good to see you. You're still in Washington, D.C. Control of the U.S. Congress is at stake here. Would you explain that to our viewers?
Well, yes, that is another big issue during this year's election, and control of the Capitol Hill is something important for both Republicans and the Democrats. Now, essentially, the race to White House and both the Capitol Hill has started, and voting is underway in full swing across United States, including here in Washington, D.C., where millions of Americans are right now casting their ballots. Now, essentially, we have been speaking since morning, and the issues that are dominating are immigration, unemployment, foreign policy issues, and of course the 7 swing states, especially Pennsylvania, which is key to who will be the next president of the White House. I have been speaking to many voters as well, many women voters. For them, the big issue is the abortion issue, the reproductive rights issue, and for that they have been supportive of Kamala Harris's policies. But many male voters, especially above 40s, businessmen, have been supporter of Donald Trump, given the promises he has made when it comes to taxation issue. But something that is something that resonates with everyone is the issue of cost of living, and inflation is another major issue here dominating the agenda as well. I spoke to many Indian American voters as well, who of course see Donald Trump as an important player. Traditionally, remember that not only Indian Americans but immigrant voters are supportive of Democrats. But it's looking like it's going to change this time around, given the fact that especially the Indian American voters, they do not find any resonance, in fact much resonance with Kamala Harris. So it's a neck-on-neck battle. We can carry on talking about both the candidates, but this is a never-ending debate, and this is a very divided country. What I have understood from past few days I have been here in Washington, people are essentially in their own echo chamber in many senses, and the big question is that how both sides, I mean the Trump supporters and Kamala Harris supporters, could find a middle ground, because the middle ground is missing in the United States.
Siddhant Sibol, very quickly, you did mention talking to the people. Have you had a glimpse of the polling centers in Washington, D.C.? How is the mood there?
Well, today is a working day essentially, and today is Tuesday. In fact, by tradition, it's a tradition which is a long-standing tradition that the first Tuesday of November, after every cycle of election process, sees the election. So people around me are going to offices, but people are also going to the polling center as well. We have seen footages across the country now coming in as to how people are voting in their ballot, counting themselves in. But it's not that elections just started today. We know that ballot voting had started earlier as well. People were doing early voting as well. But essentially today is in many ways the last day of voting, and by evening we'll not only see the voting coming to an end. It's around 4:30 a.m. Indian time that the first voting centers will close, and they will continue to close till 11:30 a.m. Indian Standard Time. So it's a long day, and we will soon get to know the results. And the big question remains on the results as well, as to how the Democratic nominee and of course the Republican nominee concede their victory, they concede their defeat and accept their victory as well, because there are big question marks over that. The lessons of 2021 January are something that the authorities have learnt, and across the city, if you travel around, there are a number of fences up, there are a number of placards, the wooden placards up in front of establishments, shops as well. So nobody wants to take any chances. The big worry remains that if there will be post-poll protests or violence, that's something that Washington DC and America has braced up.
All right, that is our correspondent at the Capitol Hill, Siddhant Sibol. Siddhant, thank you. VOA correspondent Jessica Stone from Arlington, United States, also joined us earlier with this report.
Northern Virginia in particular, it's pretty blue. I mean, Harris is running 6 points ahead of Trump here across the state. And here in Northern Virginia, this area tends to go Democratic. And if I can have my photographer friend here, Chenny, pan over, you can just see an indication of that. The signs behind me are all Democrat elected officials or people running for office. In fact, you see no evidence of any Trump signs there at all. So that gives you some indication of the types of voices you're hearing here in Arlington, Virginia. And over here, some of the people that are getting out the vote are working for the Harris-Wells campaign, but they, of course, have to stay a certain number of feet back from the actual polling location.
Let's now talk more about this election. Daniel Mallinson is an associate professor of public policy and administration at Penn State, Harrisburg, and is now joining us live from Pennsylvania. Mr. Mallinson, thank you very much for making time for us and joining us at this critical hour. We've been talking about swing states, and Pennsylvania has stood out in these elections. Why is this state so important in these elections?
Sure, thanks for having me. So, Pennsylvania has the most electoral votes of the 7 or 8 battleground states that are up for grabs in this election, with 19. It's also a state that, as was mentioned earlier, we've seen swing back and forth in the last two elections. So former President Trump was able to win it by about 44,000 votes in 2016, and President Biden won in 2020 with about 80,000 votes. We expect the state to be pretty close again. So the candidates have been spending a lot of money and a lot of time here to try to win these 19 electoral votes.
Mr. Daniel, control of the U.S. Congress is at stake in these elections that could flip both the House of Representatives and the Senate, while still leaving Capitol Hill divided between Republicans and Democrats. Could you explain that further to our audience who really do not understand how this election is going to play out?
Sure. So right now, the Democrats have, I believe it's a one-seat majority in the Senate, and the Republicans have just a 3 or 4 seat majority in the House. So both chambers are very evenly divided. If you look at the Senate, the Democrats have a rougher time in this election in terms of where they're having to defend seats, including here in Pennsylvania. Our Democratic Senator Bob Casey is up for re-election in a state that, again, Republicans are certainly able to win. Sherrod Brown in Ohio is a Democrat, but Ohio has become a state that's pretty consistently Republican. So the Democrats could lose some seats and lose the Senate. The House could go the other way. We have several competitive races here in Pennsylvania, including right here in Harrisburg, Scott Perry's district. He's a Republican and is facing a pretty steep re-election bid. So any sort of small movement towards the Democrats in the House could flip the House as well. So both are pretty narrow and both could change.
Mr. Daniel, this is a D-Day for America. This is the final straw. This is where it all boils down to. What are your predictions, very quickly?
My prediction is that we will probably not know who is the president tonight. It may take a couple of days, especially if states like Pennsylvania are very close. And at this point, it could really go either way. I can't predict who's going to ultimately win. We're essentially at a coin flip here in Pennsylvania. So it's going to depend on who gets the most people out to vote.
All right. I've been talking to Mr. Daniel Mallinson. He's an associate professor of public policy and administration at Penn State, Harrisburg in Pennsylvania. Professor Mallinson, thank you for talking to us today.
Thank you.
Let's move on now. Here's a quick recap of the night before election. But before we recap that, J.D. Vance, I understand, is speaking to some of the voters. Let's just listen to what he has to say.
On the same team, however we voted. I certainly hope you vote for Donald J. Trump today. I think that his policies are going to promote peace and prosperity for our citizens. But if you vote the wrong way, in my view, I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to treat you as a fellow citizen. And if I am lucky enough to be your vice president, I'm going to fight hard for your dreams and for your family over the next 4 years.
Senator, do you have an opinion on who will fill your Senate seat if you win?
No, look, I'm way too superstitious to think about those things. Let's get this election over the finish line. Let's make Donald J. Trump the president-elect, and then we'll worry about what happens afterwards. No, actually, he called me about 3 in the morning, apparently from the plane headed from Michigan to Palm Beach last night. I was in bed at the time. I haven't been able to talk to him this morning. I was going to call him as soon as I woke up, but when I realized that he got back home around 5:30 last night, I decided hopefully he's asleep, and so I'm not going to call him. I'll certainly talk to him probably on the way to the airport or when we land.
Senator, you grew up 20 miles away in Middletown. Now you're standing here, maybe in a few hours you'll be the next vice president.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about that in that moment? Here to here, and possibly second in command.
Look, it's an amazing thing. My heart is just overwhelmed with gratitude to the generosity of the American people. The fact that I'm standing here is very much a testament to the fact that we live in the greatest country in the history of the world. The fact that I have a beautiful wife and 3 beautiful kids is more importantly a testament to the fact that we live in the greatest country in the world. So I think that what today represents is an opportunity to pay down a debt that I owe to this country. And if I am the vice president, I'm going to work as hard as I can to pay down that debt. I don't think I'll ever be able to return what this country has given to me, but I'm going to try, but we have to win first.
Sir.
You know, my most important message is we ought to argue disagree about, persuade each other about politics. That's part of the natural process. But we can't discard friends and we can't discard family members. I think that if we all just recognize this basic principle that we ought to love people, we ought to be friends with people, we ought to be family members with people, regardless of their politics, that would do a lot to heal the division. I know myself, I've had a lot of friends, not a lot, I've had a few friends who have cast their friendship aside because I decided that I wanted Donald J. Trump to be the winner in the last election and in this election. I think that's a tragedy, and I'm not going to follow that example. I'd say to everybody, whether you're voting for Donald Trump or voting for Kamala Harris, remember, friends and family, that stuff is what really, really matters. We ought to be kind to one another. We ought to treat each other with respect. And fundamentally, what we're trying to do, President Trump and I, is just build the kind of country where our fellow Americans can achieve their dreams. But that's all of our fellow Americans, regardless of who they vote for. We'll take one more question. No, I'm not too worried about that. Look, one outlier poll doesn't change what we've seen on the ground. We feel very good about the energy. We feel very good about the early vote. But ultimately, the ball is in the courts of the American people. Today is the day. If you don't want an open border, vote for Donald Trump. If you want to get back to low inflation and affordable groceries, vote for Donald Trump. If you want to return the world to peace and stability, vote for Donald Trump. That's my pitch to voters. I really do believe that we can have a golden age of prosperity in the United States of America, but voters are going to ultimately make that choice. I don't worry about any one poll. I think that we're going to win. I really do, but ultimately the voters make that decision. We'll see what they think about this by the end of the day, hopefully. God bless you guys. Thank you.
That is Republican vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance speaking to the press after he cast his ballot in Ohio, and he also interacting with some of the voters there in Cincinnati, Ohio. That's where he cast his ballot. He's urging voters to vote for Trump, and he's promising various policies, as you heard from him, talking to the press there and telling them that a Trump presidency is going to give America what it needs if he's voted back to the White House. So that is the Republican vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, who's just cast his ballot in Cincinnati, Ohio. For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.